So let us continue our discussion on literary history by looking at Henry James. Henry James lived between 1843 and 1916. Henry James lived between 1843 and 1916. He is a major critic of the novel. He's one of the pioneer critics of the novel. Henry James is one of the pioneer critics of the novel. So remember that the novel is a recent art form, more recent than the other genres of literature. And while we've had great critics of the other genres in the previous ages, we've not really had important theorizations on the novel until Henry James. Until Henry James came in the 19th century to theorize on the novel. And the work which contains Henry James' ideas on the theorization about the novel is entitled The Art of Fiction. The Art of Fiction. The Art of Fiction, published in 1884. In this work, Henry James presents the first well-articulated theory of the novel. In this work, Henry James presents the first well-articulated theory of the novel. He says that the novel should first be interesting and realistic. Thank God you said you've just been taught realism. So realism functioned more in the novel. That's why you normally hear about realism in the novel. Realism as an approach to literary interpretation functions very well with the novel. Because the novel, according to Henry James, needed to be what? Realistic. The novel, according to Henry James, needed to be realistic. A work is said to be realistic when it is faithful to a depiction of reality in the real world. That means a realistic work strives to be as close as is possible to reality in the human world. Apart from being interesting and realistic, the novel should also be organic, meaning that the novel should have a structure of its own. The novel ought to have a structure of its own. The novel ought to have a structure of its own. It has to be organic. So the novel is interesting because it ought to be entertaining. Most novels are quite voluminous. Of course, the novel is an extended narrative in prose. Extended has to do with the length. It is the lengthiest of fiction. That's what you need to understand. So if someone has to sit down and read it, something that lengthy, then it has to be interesting. It has to be entertaining. That's why sometimes, no matter how voluminous the novel is, people read it from the beginning to the end because of the story it tells. Because it tells the story in an interesting way. So, the first characteristic of the novel, according to Henry James, is that it has to be interesting. It has to be interesting. It has to arrest attention. It has to capture attention. It has to be thrilling. And this specification about the character of the novel is sustained till today. If you read a novel, if you write a novel and it's not interesting, no one is going to read it. It has to be a page turner. It has to be what? A page turner. It has to turn the pages. That means immediately you begin the reading, it should hook you, the story should hook you, and you want to read to the end. Otherwise, you've not succeeded as a novelist. So, first of all, it has to be interesting. The novel has to be interesting. Then it has to be realistic, meaning it has to depict reality in the real world. And then the novel ought also to be organic. By that, it means it needs to have its own structure. The novel has to have its own internal structure, which we analyze when we are critiquing the novel. Something we did right from year 2. And then it is important that though the novel is realistic, Henry James specifies that there should be an artistic distance. It was artistic distance. Artistic distance. There should be artistic distance between what the novel says and the life of the author. So the author should create artistic distance between the artist and the art. There should be artistic distance between the artist and the art, because that is what makes it fiction. Otherwise, it will be kind of autobiography or biography. Autobiography because you write about yourself, and biography because someone else writes about you. So, artistic distance is important. When writing the novel, the author has to distance himself from the art, because the novel is a modernist thing. It is not a romantic thing. All right? It is in romanticism that the author expresses himself. But in the modern work of art, the artist eclipses himself, which is what we say we want to consider tenets of modernism. As far as Henry James is concerned, the novel should aim to show and not to tell. It is what we tell new authors all the time: show, don't tell. It's what we tell new authors all the time: show, don't tell. Show, don't tell. The novel should aim to show and not to tell. Henry James believed that the impressionistic yardstick, the impressionistic approach, could still be used in the determination of the worth of the novel. The impressionistic approach could still be used in the determination of the worth of the novel, in the critique of the novel. So let us go on and talk about. So impressionistic criticism uses the critic's impressions to determine the worth of the literary work. The critic uses emotions, feelings, to interpret the work of art. That's based on how he or she feels while reading the work of art. And we have said that impressionistic criticism is not the best form of criticism, except it is supported by some kind of rules and principles. All right, so we move on to modern literary criticism. Modern literary criticism. We move on to modern literary criticism. The modern period began in the 20th century. The modern period began in the 20th century. And by that we are talking about 1900 down. And some scholars say we are still in the modern period. But modernism began around 1910, around 1910, and lasted till the 1930s and the 1940s. In the 1940s and the 1950s began postmodernism, which is still an outgrowth of modernism. And some scholars believe that currently, from the 1980s to now, we are living in the age of postmodernism. But everything can still be grouped and called the modern world, with different temper characterizing the modern world. So when it comes to modernist criticism or modern criticism, the critique branches into different directions. The critique branches into different directions. When it comes to modern criticism, the critique branches into different theoretical directions. With many proponents and different proponents having different ideas. So it should be noted that modernism, or the ideas that characterize modernism, were triggered by the events of the First World War, or if you like, the aftermath of the First World War. Which shook the foundation of the modern world. The First World War, fought between 1914 and 1918, shook the foundation of the modern world. And led people to question the existence of God. It led people to question the existence of God. Because people thought that a good and loving God would not sit back and watch so many people dying without intervention, without intervening. And so modernism is marked by doubt in the existence of God. A major tendency in modernism is the radical break with tradition. A major tendency in modernism is a traditional break with tradition. A radical break with tradition characterizes modernism. People refuse to think the way people in the previous ages used to think. People refuse to think the way people in the previous ages used to think. And this affected literature and criticism. Writers found new ways of writing, new ideas in writing that were in sharp contradiction to what obtained in the previous ages. So traditional notions of art and culture were dismantled by the modernist writers and thinkers and critics. One of the major philosophies that modernism opposed was the romanticism of the previous ages. Was the romanticism of the previous age. So modernism is opposed to romanticism. Modernism is opposed to romanticism. Modernism is opposed to romanticism. Because while romanticism sees the work of art as expressive, modernism sees the work of art as objective. Expressive in the sense that it mirrors the emotions of the author, the personality of the author. Objective in the sense that the work of art has its own internal structure, oblivious of what the author thinks. This is the major difference between romantic art and modern art. This is the major difference between romantic art and modern art, modernist art. So there were precursors to modernism. Precursors. Everybody said precursors. There were precursors to modernism. And by precursors we mean, we spell P-R-E-C-U-R-S-O-R-S, precursors. So these precursors came in the form of thinkers whose ideas preceded modernist thinking. That means they contributed to modernist thinking and modernist ideas. One of them is Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche is spelled first Friedrich, F-R-I-E-D-R-I-C-H. Friedrich Nietzsche is spelled N-I-E-T-Z-S-C-H-E, Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche. He lived between 1844 and 1900. Friedrich Nietzsche lived between 1844 and 1900. Then you have Karl Marx. Karl Marx, the proponent or one of the major proponents of Marxism, Karl Marx. And then you also have Sigmund Freud. Whose ideas preceded modernist thinking and contributed to modernist thinking. Sigmund Freud. Among others. So Friedrich Nietzsche is the philosopher who is remembered for his theory called nihilism or nihilism. Nihilism or nihilism. Nihilism is spelled Nihilism. Nihilism or nihilism. 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 Okay? The nihilist philosophy proposes a complete overhaul of societal structures because it refuses to believe in the structures and institutions of society, including religion. It's a complete lack of belief in society as it is contemporary, as it is set up in contemporary times. As it is set up in contemporary times. Especially a lack of belief in organized religion. So a nihilist is someone who does not believe in the contemporary structures of society, including politics and religion. So the nihilist character is usually isolated, reserved. The nihilist character is usually isolated and reserved. The nihilist character is usually isolated, shy, or reserved. Is usually an unconventional man. Usually goes against the dictates and the principles of society, including morality, including the moral standards of society. So sometimes you meet the nihilist character in a literary work, but you cannot describe him as nihilist because you don't know about nihilism. But now that you learned about nihilism, when you meet such characters in works of literature, you know that this character is nihilistic in nature. The character does not believe in the moral principles of society, in the institutions of society, in the societal setup and structures. So his characterization, his actions usually go against the societal structures. So Nietzsche also propounded the death of God theory. The death of God theory. Nietzsche also propounded the death of God theory. Remember that Nietzsche lived in the Victorian period, and by the Victorian period we already had science shaking the stability of human society. By the Victorian period, science was already shaking the stability of human society. Because for one, someone like Charles Darwin at this time came and said, look, you were not created by a good and loving God. You were not created by a good and loving God, but rather you evolved. He came up with a theory of evolution. Whereas human beings in the previous ages were taught that they were created by God, who loves and cares for them. And Darwin came up in the Victorian period, in the 19th century, and said, that is wrong. You were not created by God. You evolved from lower creatures. And you are just like any other animal, except that you are blessed with reasoning. So all these ideas shook the foundations of religious faith. And they are all precursors to the modern philosophy, the modernist philosophy. So Nietzsche says God died. God died. That's what Nietzsche said. God died. That there was no God anywhere, but that if God existed, he had died long ago. He has succumbed to the forces of existence in the society, in the universe. He has been swept away by existential forces, just like any other living being would die. So Nietzsche propounded the death of God theory. So when the moderns needed something to believe, when so many people died in millions, they turned to these philosophies for inspiration. Because they said, there's no God that is loving who will sit back and watch millions of people being killed without intervention, without doing something about it. So you must understand that the modernist philosophy is a godless philosophy. It's a what? A godless philosophy. Philosophy that doubts the existence of God. It's a godless philosophy. And of course, after Darwin, Darwin brought about the evolution theory, the evolutionary theory, that said that all life evolved and that no one was created by any divine intervention, and that no one was created in 7 days, but that life evolved through millions of years. Okay? So you could imagine the shock and the surprise that the people were thrown into who had long believed, or were made to believe, that they were created. And then Darwin also went on to say that nature selected the best cell to survive. Nature selected the best cell to survive. That means nature is not predisposed to supporting the weak. It's only the strong that get to survive. That is what we call the theory of natural selection. The theory of natural selection. Or what some people call survival of the fittest. The survival of the fittest. You got to be strong to survive even in Nigeria. Because Nigeria is not for the weak. All right? It's just for the strong. So life selects the best cells to survive. Because life is competitive. And only the strongest get to make it to life. All the weak cells die off. Only the strongest survive. That's the theory of natural selection. The survival of the fittest. Okay? And we normally say, evolve or die. Alright? Evolve or die. Either you choose to evolve or you give way in a competitive world. Right? So even to be born is a war, right? Even to be born is a serious competitive race. Okay? That involves millions of sperm cells. that race towards the egg at the point of birth. And only one out of the millions will make it to the egg and become a living being, and that is you. Congratulations on winning that race. It was not easy. Okay? That means all of you are champions. You were first, right? You were first. Okay? You came first. Except that we don't understand why you now choose to carry second. Okay? Having been born, having won that race, you don't want to win any other race again. You just carry, if you carry second, you are happy that you've carried second. Okay? And some people even celebrate carrying third. At least I've tried. Okay? So even celebrate not failing at all. Even if it's the E and E, it is an E, let me go. So to live with that kind of philosophy in the modern world means that there's little or no humanity in human relations. There's little or no humanity in human relations. Everything is a cruel competition. Because like you have to surmount someone else in order to survive. Everyone seems to be competing for scarce resources, scarce materials. And in that kind of environment, there's no human sympathy, no mercy. And in the end, it's only the weak that are crushed. So you can imagine the scenario of how human beings live in the modern world. There's no drop of human mercy, human sympathy, human kindness. Because life, when viewed as a competition to survive in the midst of scarce resources, then the smartest, the strongest are those who survive. However, sometimes it gets to a point where some people usually take the laws into their hands. They get superior power, superior weapons, and force other members of society to their will. Whether it is in the form of armed robberies or in the form of doing election, in any form of competition, it is that same modernist spirit that lacks human sympathy that is in operation. And that is the modern world for you. Life selects the strongest to survive. At any given human era, survival begins with intellectual strength. The most intellectually sound people get to survive. Then those who are strong physically also get to survive. And better still, those who combine physical and mental strength get to survive. Then we have Karl Marx. Karl Marx lets us to understand that there is an economic force that operates in society. Karl Marx makes us to understand that there is an economic force that operates in society. Before now, people knew about the supernatural force. The fact that it was God that destined people for wealth and destined others for a life of penury. But Karl Marx said, no, there's an economic force in society. In Das Kapital. in the work das capital. DAS K DAS space KAPITAL, das capital. There's an economic force that operates in society. And that people were not destined to be wealthy and others destined to be poor. People are wealthy or poor based on the dynamics of the economic forces operating in society. So it is then that you realize, that the wealthy in society are the owners of capital. The wealthy in society are who? The owners of capital. The workers will never be rich because they are not the owners of capital. The workers are just given just enough money to take them from month to month so that they can continue to work. And who do they work for? They work for the owners of capital who reap profits from the labors of the workers. That is the economic force that exists in societies. The worker will be comfortable. The worker will have something to eat, but not wealthy, not rich, because his salary has been measured, his wages, they call it wages, have been measured to keep him a worker for life. And most of the time, the education system has been structured to teach people how to be workers and not to be owners of capital. Education system has been structured to teach people how to be workers and not to be owners of capital. Which is why immediately people finish school, they say, I want to work. I'm looking for work. I need work. I need a job. I want employment. Because they were trained to work and not trained to be owners of capital, employer of labor. So Karl Marx believes that human history is a vicious cycle of conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Human's history is a vicious cycle of conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, between the rich and the poor, between the owners of capital and the laborers. The laborers are the oppressed. The capitalists, the owners of capital, are the oppressors. So in the capitalist system, which Marxism criticizes, ownership of resources, ownership of the manufacturing or production machinery of a state is in the hands of private individuals and corporations, who are the owners of capital. And then they employ laborers that they pay meager wages to work for them, to bring profit which they earn, and pay the laborers just enough to make them live till the end of the month. And then in the capitalist society, they use religion to blind the eyes of the workers as to who the real problem is in society. They create Satan so that when the laborer is hungry, he will pray to God to give him food. They create Satan and God in the capitalist society as a distraction, so that the laborers, the worker, the oppressed worker, will pray to God to punish the Satan that is stopping him from eating good food. All right? The Satan that is making him to be poor, not to have money to go to hospital, send his children to school. That Satan should die in Jesus' name. Okay? So that his attention will not be drawn to the owner of capital, the bourgeoisie, the politicians, the corporations who have taken his rights. And so they raise their heads to heaven where no God exists and call on God who cannot come and help him. Because God is not his problem. His problem is the owner of capital, the politicians. All right? Those in power, the owners of big corporations who have taken their rights. So religion becomes the opiate of the masses in Marxist terms. Religion is what? The opiate of the masses. It is something that they use to seduce the masses so that they don't know who their real problems are. Okay? Somebody tell you Satan is your problem. You need to pray to God to fight the Satan in your life. Whereas the real problems are moving around freely. Okay? So now you know. That is why the society, in the society which Marxism tries to create, which is a communist society, there is no religion. The communist society is what? A godless society. There's no religion. But religion must be found in a capitalist society because it diverts the people's attention from the real problem and makes it look like the people are fighting spiritual battles. So when they go on the road, when they start on a journey from Uyo to Lagos, you understand? They start with prayer. They have an opening prayer, then they have praise and worship on the road, and they pray for journey mercies, God to guard the tires, guard the drivers. But the road is bad. Okay? The road is bad. And there are kidnappers on the road. That God should save them from the kidnappers. You don't pray to be saved from kidnappers. You send security agents there to the road, right? You repair the road to avoid accident. You don't pray to God to do that for you. And you make sure that the vehicle is in good condition. The driver is psychologically sound. All right? Now your driver has taken all the combines. All right? In the park. The yellow one, the red one, the black one. And you pray to God to guide the driver. Sigmund Freud introduced us to the existence of psychological forces in human society. The existence of psychological forces in human societies. Sigmund Freud introduced us to the existence of psychological forces in human society. For the first time in human history, we realize that the mind is the God of man. For the first time in human society, we realize that the mind is the God of man. That everything about us, our behavior, our conduct, the way we react to events and situations, even our success or failures in life, depend on the state of our mind. They all depend on the state of the individual's mind. So that the rationalists will tell you that there is no God out there except the mind. There's no God out there except the mind. And that once the individual loses his mind, loses his life. Once the individual loses his mind, the individual loses his life. But then again, the mind is then delicate. The mind of man is so delicate and can easily break down when pressured by other existential forces. The mind of man is quite delicate. It could break down, could crash if pressured too much by other existential forces. Which is why the individual has to guide his mind and mental well-being as much as he could, as much as they could, because there is the source of life. Even the Bible says it. The Bible realizes the importance of the mind. Your conduct, your behavior, your response to situations, your success or failure in life will depend on your mental state. The mind is the most creative, is a seat of creativity of man, but it is delicate. The world has been transformed, and so transformed because of the mind, the creative power in the minds of man. You could see a place that was a jungle being turned into a city flooded with light at night. There's no God anywhere that has done that except the mind of man. It's the creativity in the mind of man that has made that possible. But then that mind is very delicate and has to be protected at all costs. Has to be protected at all costs. Because it can be your best friend, it can also be your worst enemy. That's when it goes bad, when something goes wrong. And what you need to understand from Freud's perspective is that all our experiences in life coalesce to impact the mind at a certain point in our life. All the experiences of life that we've had will coalesce to do what? Impact the mind at a certain point. From childhood, especially childhood experiences. Especially childhood experiences. So then we become a totality, the human being is a totality of what he or she has gone through. The human being is what? A sum of all that he or she has gone through in life. Okay? So, someone's childhood that was full of bread, egg, Indomie, fried plantain, fried rice, chicken, outing in the park, excursion to pleasant places, will not be the life of someone whose childhood was gari in the morning, gari in the afternoon, Gary in the evening, you know. Farming as a child, farming whether it's the sun is high, whether it's raining, whether it's thunder, whether thunder is striking. Okay, some of these children they don't eat eggs until maybe when they grow up. Okay, okay, so that's why for some people you tell them 1 plus 1, everybody responds 1. Two, sorry, 1 plus 1, everybody will reply 2. And then you ask the same person after some 5 minutes, 1 plus 1, so 11. So it's childhood. It started from childhood, so that's why we don't always blame you. You understand? Or they have a lot of burden to carry. They don't have time to read. Okay? They're thinking too much. You are sent to, you come to school, you don't know when your next school fees will come from. Will not be the same as someone whose school fees have been paid. Book supply, doesn't have problem of food. So that's what I'm saying. The sum of our experiences at the end of the day will impact on our on the mind, and then the outcome will be obvious, pretty obvious. And we learn this from Sigmund Freud, who says that childhood experiences have a way of impacting later adult life. Childhood experiences have a way of impacting other adult life. So there's a psychological force. That's why when we tell people don't take combine, don't take, is it shisha? Don't take ice. It's still part of it. Because Indian hymn, smoking, colos, so that they will be on colos. Don't take these things, they don't hear. Because it is your mind. Before you know it, you see them on the roadside. Okay? Because they do not protect their mind. So when an individual loses his mind, there's a mental force. And all our existential experiences impact the mind. When it is too much, that's why you should pray that you should not go through too much ordeal in life to the point that it will overtake your mind. People go through too much that you greet them, they don't answer, they are still going. Okay, because they have not seen you. There's a lot going on in the mind. Okay, that's how it starts. You understand? Should not suffer too much in life. If you suffer too much in life, it will affect the mind later. When the problems are too much, when the suffering is too much, it all goes to the mind. So the modern man understands the impact of the mind on the other aspects of the individual's life. Okay? So instead of trying to prove a point that you can drink, trying to prove a point to your guy that you can drink, just tell them, I'm a gentleman, I don't drink. Because you know that you're keeping your mind for something better. So that is why the modern critique of literature is psychological. The modern critique of literature has a psychological aspect, has a psychological angle. And you cannot be a critic in the modern world without understanding the psychological ramifications of text and writing. The psychology behind every action. That's why sometimes when people behave the way they will behave, we who have studied psychology, we simply understand with them. All right? We know where it's coming from. It is not their fault. Okay? It's not their fault. That's why we have psychoanalysis. We psychoanalyze the individual based on what they are doing. And we can even link it to past experiences that have contributed to that behavior, to that action. So the mind for Freud is made up of the conscious segment and the unconscious segment. The conscious segment and the unconscious segment. The conscious and the unconscious. The conscious part and the unconscious part. The conscious part and the unconscious part. The conscious part of the mind is the logical part of the mind. Is the part of the mind that is awake. Is the part of the mind that is logical, reasonable, and you use it to operate from day to day. Use it to operate from day to day. Like now that you're in class, you're using the conscious part of the mind. You're writing, you're aware of what you're doing, you know what you're doing. That's the conscious part of the mind. You know that you are yourself, that you're writing, that you're in class, that you're learning. That's the conscious part of the mind. Okay? It is logical, it is reasonable, it is sound, it is awake, and you use it to act from day to day, to operate from day to day. Okay? When somebody comes and provokes you in school, your conscious part of the mind will say, report this person, don't fight this person. Because fighting means what? Expulsion. Okay? That's your conscious part of the mind acting. You are aware of the social rules and everything. Okay? But then there's also the unconscious part of the mind that appears to be dead, appears to be inactive, appears to be dead, appears to be inactive. The unconscious part of the mind is illogical. It's unreasonable because it contains repressed experiences. It contains repressed experiences. Repressed. Right from childhood. Repressed experiences are experiences that are too shameful to be remembered, too threatening, too shameful, full of guilt, and you don't want to remember them. So your mind knows that you don't like that aspect of the experience, so it pushes it to the unconscious part of the mind so that you don't remember them, because each time you remember them, it brings shame, guilt, and unpleasant feelings because of what has happened. So you choose all those experiences that you don't want to remember are pushed to the unconscious part of the mind. So they are repressed. So the mind sits on them, doesn't allow them to come up to the consciousness, so that you can go around doing your normal work on daily basis. But sometimes the unconscious part of the mind slips into the conscious part. And that's when people react without thinking. That's when people react without thinking. Any action that you take, and suddenly you realize yourself, know that it was the unconscious part of the mind that came to play, slipped into the conscious part. And how do we gain access into the unconscious part of the mind? The conscious part of the mind tries to block the unconscious part of the mind all the time, but it does not succeed all the time. Sometimes it fails, and the content will slip to the conscious part. Maybe through jokes. Through what? Jokes. All right? Maybe through an object. Maybe through a word that someone has said. Maybe through a word, a sentence, a story. So sometimes someone tells a joke and the other person gets angry and start warning the person that you should never try that joke again, that's not funny, that's not a joke at all, and is even ready to fight with the person. At that point, know that there's something that joke has brought from the unconscious part of the mind to the conscious part that makes that person angry suddenly. Then the unconscious part of the mind can also manifest through a slip of tongue. Sometimes someone says something and then, like, why did I say that? That means it was not supposed to have come out. Okay? It was supposed to have been repressed. But it's found its way out because the content of the unconscious mind contains unpleasant feelings. They usually conflict with the conscious part of the mind that wants it to stay hidden. And that is where neurosis begins. That's where neurosis begins. And most of these experiences could be childhood experiences that we don't want to remember, or other shameful deeds that the individual doesn't want to remember, other guilty deeds. But because they are active, they do come up once in a while. So there's a constant conflict between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And it is this same conflict that we find in works of literature. Okay? It's the same conflict that we find in works of literature. And sometimes the unconscious lets out itself through dreams and nightmares. So through dreams and nightmares, you release the content of the unconscious in a distorted way. In a distorted format. So the neurotic individual is one who is not able to balance, whose mind is not able to balance the relationship between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And neurosis manifests in many ways. The individual could be violent, could be distracted, be finding it difficult to concentrate, could have nightmares, could have phobias. That's the different fears that we have. Fear of height, fear of snake, fear of cockroach, fear of coming to school, Fear of reading, right? Fear of examination. Fear of water. Some people fear crowds. Some people fear to stay in a small space. Some people fear to be left alone. Some people can kill lion, but they fear cockroaches. They can kill lion, but they can't stand cockroaches. It's still part of the neurotic aspects of the individual. So what we are saying is that the mind of man is complex and delicate at the same time. The mind of man is complex and delicate at the same time. And this is one of the major subjects of criticism in the modern world. Some of the important works in modernist literature. Some of the important works in modernist literature are. Some of the important works in modernist literature are Ulysses by James Joyce, Ulysses by James Joyce. This is by James Joyce. You have T.S. Eliot's Westland, The Westland by T.S. Eliot. The Westland by T.S. Eliot. The Westland by T.S. Eliot. And Virginia Woolf's Jacob's Room. Virginia Woolf's Jacob's Room. Virginia Woolf's Jacob's Room. An important modernist concept you need to grapple with is the avant-garde. An important modernist movement concept that you need to grapple with is the what? Is the avant-garde. The avant-garde. This expression is French. It's French for advance-garde. It's French for advance-garde. And the expression defines the modernist ethos in literary criticism. Advance-garde. It refers to, the term refers to the tendency in modernism to break away with tradition and experiment with form and technique. And experiment with form and technique. Break away with tradition and experiment with forms and techniques. New forms and new techniques. Avant-garde or avant-garde can be understood when the context of the expression make it new. When the context of the expression make it new. Make it new. Which was said by Ezra Pound. The expression make it new, which was proposed by Ezra Pound as a modernist slogan. That means that modernist writers wanted to experiment with art forms and different techniques in new or novel ways. In novel ways. They wanted to write using different style, new style. So Ezra Pound defines modernism using the expression "make it new." Modernism is characterized by experimentation in forms and techniques. That means the modernist writers rebelled against previous literary techniques and style. They wanted to write using different or new forms and techniques. Modernism had different concepts to define it. Modernism had different arts concepts and ideologies to define it. Modernism had different art concepts, ideologies, principles, ideologies to define it. Some of them are Cubism. Futurism, Dada or Dadaism, Constructivism, and Surrealism.